Colin. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you, Will?
I'm doing very well. We are officially 1 month in. To celebrate, I poured myself a little drink, uh, which is what you just heard, but it is what it is. We poured a drink. 1 month in, we're going to talk about some very interesting stuff today. Very excited. Trying to think of other stuff. This intro was very sort of like on the spot, just sort of come up with it.
Off
But
the cuff for once, right?
off the cup, exactly. Well, that's a funny joke because I've got a cup right here. We're ready to go. You're going to hear the cup clanging around a little bit in the background probably until I'm done drinking. But it's here to celebrate 1 month. To all the support we've gotten so far, thank you all very much. We hope to continue getting that support. We hope to continue making good episodes. We hope to have some good content to put out for you guys. Other than that, I think we're just about ready to go for today. So, Colin, how's your week been?
It has been pretty good. I just started a new job. I've been praying a lot for Lent, and I've been anticipating this episode because I've been doing a lot of research lately on Catholicism as a whole. So I'm ready to bust out some of the new information that I've learned. I read Revelations today in anticipation for this episode, not necessarily because this episode is going to talk about Revelations at all, but because I haven't read Revelations yet, and I really needed to. So I am very much in the theology mood right now, even though we're not going to be talking about much theology today.
No, today's going to be very, a very different. Well, I won't say very different. It's going to be an interesting episode. I remember for the very first episode, or really what the description of the entire podcast is that two guys who are trying to learn more about the faith and try and figure it out. Just talk about world events through the Catholic lens of what we understand so far. And we have said before, and we are going to keep saying that we will probably end up getting things wrong. So please do not take what we say as church teaching because we want to avoid scandal. We don't want to say something and then have somebody else go out and say. So, verify for us what we're saying. But today is going to be one of those things where we're talking about world events. There's a couple of key things that happened in the last week or a week and a half that I do really want to discuss because they are important. And I know one of these things, when I sent it to Colin, he got very, very fired up about it. So we're going to talk about that. And we might end up getting a little bit passionate about it because, again, this is stuff we care about. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm very excited. But I do want to talk about this for just a little bit longer. You said that you were reading Revelations to get ready for this, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I didn't read Revelations, but I have been reading a couple of other books recently. I say a couple, really only one. I've been reading the Confessions of Saint Augustine. I'm about halfway through. It is an excellent book. It's basically all it is Saint Augustine talks about how he sucked at life and then came back to God and learned Catholicism. So it's actually really interesting. Um, so
I,
yeah,
I've actually been doing a
it's
little bit
a
more reading than just Revelation. Last Saturday, I mentioned on our podcast last week that I went to the Catholic Men for Christ conference, and I picked up two books. I picked up Symbolon by Edward Sri because that's the TV series he does, where he explains the Catholic faith from the most basic all the way to the most complicated. And this book has been a fantastic read. I actually bought it for my fiance so that she could learn more about Catholicism. And then there's also The Art of Living, which is a book dedicated to how to live a virtuous life. Beyond just living as a Catholic, how do you become the most virtuous Catholic you can be? And how do you become a missionary for Christ? Because that's the two facets of the faith that you need. You, one, have to be virtuous, and you, two, have to spread the gospel. And this book is an excellent read for how to do that. So if you guys want some guidance on the faith, Edward Sri makes some fantastic books.
nice. Yeah. Another book I have read, like a complete book that I read, which isn't really saying a lot because it's not a super impressive feat. It was only like 3 chapters. Well, actually, I think it's only 5 chapters, maybe six if I'm wrong. But the book of James in the Bible, very nice. It's actually an excellent book, and this one it was a really eye opening book. He provides a lot of really important insights that you don't really get in well, of course you get it in the rest of the Bible because it's the Bible, but that I haven't really gotten. Like, this is the first time I've ever read the book of James in its entirety, and I read it. I was like, wow. And if you read it, as a Catholic, especially if you read it for the first time, and that's really the only way you can read it, because all the Protestants took the book of James out of their Bible. So if you take the book of James out of the Bible and then you read the book of James, you realize why the Protestants took the book of James out of the Bible. Just the one thing that I realized was like, sometimes you'll run into Protestants who will be like, yeah, you're saved by faith alone. You don't need works to do that. And like, you Catholics are wrong talking about all the good works you have to do. And then there's literally an entire section in the book of James literally labeled um, faith without works is dead. And so the entire thing is just like, yeah, you got to do good works to have good faith, because one feeds into the other and all that stuff. It's just a little interesting something that this is what we're reading. So I thought I would bring that up.
Well,
And
not only that, but the works that you do in your life, whether they be works of charity or works of service, those things are acts of your faith. So that's how you live your faith out in your actual life. Beyond just believing, you have to truly believe. You have to act upon those beliefs in order to be a true, faithful servant of God. So the book of James absolutely teaches you how to, or tells you that those things are true. And that's one of the things that is difficult about traversing Christianity, especially in the context of Protestants, is that the Protestants really deny much of the physical and actual reality, the acting out of your faith in terms of sacraments, as well as, you're not saved from the start. You're not saved just because you're baptized. You're saved because of your continual acceptance and your continual spread of the gospel. You're not saved just by saying, hey, God, I love you. You're saved by showing God that you love him.
yeah, I mean, you're right. But I think, as fun as it is to sort of dog on Protestants, that's not really the point of today's episode. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into a couple of other things. Now, I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about a couple of world events today, and the really big first one that I would like to talk about today is obviously, if you're a Catholic and you've been paying attention to any sort of like Catholic news recently, or just Christian news in general, or just cultural news in general, there was a mass in New York for a transgender activist from New York, um, who the mass itself was apparently just one giant scandal party. It was essentially what it was. So I'm going to read an article from PBS that sort of explains the entire situation first, or at least bits and pieces of the article, because the entire article itself is fairly long, so I don't want to read everything. Um, but there's a few key points here that I do want to touch on and then sort of discuss here with Colin. And then after I read these points from the article, we're going to show you uh, clips from the actual mass itself, so you can sort of see what we're talking about. But here's the article from PBS. The article is named "Funeral for Transgender Activist at St. Patrick's Cathedral Drew Over 1,000 Mourners and Church Leaders Scorn." So, there we go. This is written February 19th. And here it is. Quote, "The funeral of a renowned transgender activist in a New York cathedral elicited a denunciation of the event by a senior church official who called the mass a scandal within one of the preeminent houses of worship in U.S. Catholicism. The Roman Catholic Archdiocese of New York condemned the funeral of Cecilia Gentili, which was held in St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan and drew a large audience on Thursday. Gentili was known for a leading advocate for other transgender people, as well as sex workers and people with HIV. A post on her Instagram announced her death on February 6 at age 52. In a written statement Saturday, the Reverend Enrique Salvo, pastor of St. Patrick's, thanked those who share our outrage over the scandalous behavior at the funeral. The cathedral only knew the family and friends who were requesting a funeral mass for a Catholic and had no idea our welcome and prayer would be degraded in such a sacrilegious and deceptive way, Salvo said in the statement. Videos of Gentili's funeral showed an estimated audience of more than 1,000 celebrants, including transgender people and other friends and supporters, chanting her name, applauding, singing, offering praise of her stature as a leading light in the city's LGBTQ plus community. During one eulogy, it was widely circulated on social media. Gentili was celebrated as, quote, Saint Cecilia, the mother of all whores, unquote. Salvo called the behavior at the Mass a scandal and a potent reminder of how much we need prayer, reparation, repentance, grace, and mercy, to which this holy season of Lent invites us. Sort of skipping through a bit here. There's a couple of other things. These are all just a bunch of people who are reacting to Cecilia Gentile's death. There's a sort of statement here that the family of this woman who died, or I'm sorry, I think it was a man, because they say transgender woman, which means a man, because men can't be women, women can't be men. It's just a statement of fact that we have to accept that men are men, women are women. So yes, so this man, his family denied that the church had been deceived, and the gathering brought precious life and radical joy to the cathedral in historic defiance of the church's hypocrisy and anti-trans hatred. So that right there is a
Hypocrisy.
quote.
Wow.
Yeah, no, yeah, I know. You're one to talk about hypocrisy.
This is painful
Hypocrisy,
to
huh?
hear.
Oh yeah, no, it's kind of bad. Like I read this already earlier today in preparation for this, and as I'm sort of reading it again, it's just sort of hitting again. And then
It's just incredible how these people want to use holy ground, a cathedral, to spread this kind of blasphemy. Saying what was the quote here? It was Saint Cecilia, mother of all whores, calling this man a saint for his sin. This is quite. This is revering someone for something you should hate. You should hate sin, not praise it and raise it to the level of sainthood.
I'd like to point out a thing here that uh, this is an important fact here. This is something that we should hate, not someone. As Catholics, we are called to love the sinner, hate the sin. We went over this in our very second episode, or our first actually. We've only done three and they're already blending together. That's great. Um, but the church calls everyone out of sin. We want the person because people are inherently good, but we don't want the sin because the sin degrades a person and makes them less than perfect. And all of this, basically, the big problem with this mass. And you know what? Actually, before I make this point, I'm going to show you all the videos. So here it is. And then
place where everything is beautiful and shiny, where we could say, Cecilia, we love you. Repeat after me again. Cecilia! 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 Now give Cecilia a standing ovation.
That no one can say you cannot do it.
Esta puta, esta gran puta, merecemos amor, igualdad y los mismos derechos y una vida digna.
This whore, this great whore, Saint Cecilia, mother of all whores, today we say, we see you soon, and that you will give us the strength, the courage to continue your legacy, to continue the challenges ahead, to remain steadfast, because we know what we deserve.
So with all that, you see all of these people who are celebrating this man, and basically what it was is the man, he spent his entire life advocating for these people to just stay in their sin, because what they are doing is sin. Obviously, it is a sin to pose as a woman when you are a man. Because, and I'm not saying it's it's not a disorder. It is, but people need to help them out of that and not actively. And what this person was doing, this man, this Cecilia Gentile, was sinning and advocating for people to stay in a broken, injured state, which is essentially what all of this is. And as Catholics, we are called to call the sinner out of their injury, to heal, and to go out and sin no more. an actual quote from Jesus Christ right there, is "Go out and sin no more." So that's an important thing to place here, that these people, what they are doing is wrong, and they've got to stop doing what they're doing. Um, and there's another quote in this article that I'd like to point out here, that there was an actor named Billy Porter who sang at the funeral, that you just saw in that clip there. It was sort of like just a what's the word? A mashup of all these different clips from the funeral. And Billy Porter sang, and he basically, his singing performance there was a mockery of Our Father. And he said here that, quote, "Grief is singular, it's individual. Please know that however you grieve is what's right. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. Just make sure that you do allow yourself to do that, so that we can get to the other side of something that feels like a little bit of grace," unquote. So obviously what he's saying there about being a right and wrong way to grieve. This is one of those things where I'm actually not 100% sure about. So I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to grieve. I'm pretty sure there's a wrong way to grieve. But I also think that what these people were doing at this funeral was not grieving. I think it was open celebration of, again, sin.
Well, they
which is
were clearly celebrating the fact that they were going onto consecrated ground and blaspheming it. That was the whole
yeah,
point. They
I
were
absolutely
dancing
agree.
through the pews, calling her saint. This was a very intentional misuse. Well, not misuse, abuse of church grounds.
You're right. Yeah,
And
this is absolutely just scandal.
like
Is,
it is okay. It is okay to have a funeral in a Catholic church for someone that wasn't necessarily faithful. That is okay, because those that are in the family of that person want to send that person off in the most respectful way possible. The problem is her family. Oh my God, I'm doing it.
his family. It was a man.
His family intentionally sent him to this church so that he would be buried. His family is not Catholic. As far as I can find, his family defended the actions of these people on these grounds. You have to act Catholic to call yourself Catholic, to truly be Catholic. You cannot be Catholic by baptism and by confirmation and claim that you're Catholic solely on those grounds. And I'm not trying to exclude people from being Catholic. I believe that everyone should come to this faith because it is the most righteous, virtuous faith on the face of the planet. But you also have to understand that you can't openly disrespect the faith like this and expect to be praised for it. You will never be praised for this kind of thing. And in fact, you should be condemned for this kind of thing based on your actions. And the fact that these people are willing to do this and then celebrate that they did this and then call church leaders wrong for saying that it was sacrilegious and that it was wrong for it to happen, it's just incredible. That is hypocrisy. Not saying that homosexual activity is wrong. That's not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is claiming that you're Catholic and acting the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Oh, I found the clip itself, so I could put this in. That's awesome. The the actual there was a eulogy that was given of two people who came up and basically just called this man a whore like multiple times, and then claimed that was a thing to be proud of, which, just as a general rule of thumb, try not to sleep around with multiple people. Like, don't do that. That's a bad thing.
Yep.
And a lot of this is just we're just saying this just to throw out there that this is a bad thing, that everything that's happening here was a bad thing, obviously a scandalous thing to the Catholic Church, obviously a giant sinful thing. And thankfully, since then, the St. Patrick's Cathedral did a reparations mass. So basically, all the scandal there, it's not like it didn't happen, because it did. But the mass is now, like, the church itself is now re-blessed and all this stuff. It's no longer got the stain of, like, just this. I mean, I don't even know what to call this. Like, I really don't even know what to call this. After watching and reading about it, I really don't know what to call this. This 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 funeral, because it didn't.
It's a scandal, is what it
It was
is.
a scandal. You're right. It didn't feel, from what I saw, it didn't feel like a funeral at all. I went to a funeral literally 2 weeks ago for someone I knew at my home parish, and had deep respect for, and it was so vastly different, because this one was so respectful, and it's mourning and grieving and reminding you that this person, even though they are gone, even though they have died, they still need your prayers, because the soul is outside of time after you die, and they still need prayers to get them into heaven. This is actually one of the beliefs of Catholicism, especially with purgatory, is that people who die, who aren't quite perfected enough to get into heaven, need prayers, and that's why you pray for the souls of those who have died. And this one was the exact opposite. It was just it's more of a celebration of life, which celebrations of life are good. I don't think I don't think they're a substitute for funerals, but because a funeral is like a send off, a celebration of life as everyone gets together, and they turn this funeral away from what it's supposed to be into just a celebration of this person's life, and it wasn't even a celebration of this guy's, like, his good accomplishments. It's the celebration of what this guy is doing to call people to sin, and you know, make no mistake
Yeah,
about it. No,
that's
make no mistake
really
about it. A lot of this is a sin. It really
yep.
is, and that's sort of like a thing
That's a
that
good thing
people aren't
to
allowed to say anymore.
outline, and it's another good thing to outline is explaining the actual function of a funeral. There's 2 points to a funeral, 2 main points. One is to bring the community around this person together so that they are able to share in their grief and able to discuss and be together and support each other. The second one is to pray for the person that has passed. Those prayers go a long way. As you said, those that aren't necessarily ready to enter the gates of heaven, because everyone that enters the gates of heaven must be pure, they must be clean of sin. They need to be molded into the perfect version of themselves before they enter the gates of heaven in purgatory. And those prayers go a long way in purgatory, because as you know, if you're in purgatory, you're eventually destined for heaven. So that's the point of a funeral. And when you take a funeral and, like you said, turn it into a celebration of life, which again, celebration of life by itself is not a sin, but that's not the point of a church function funeral. And it is certainly not the point of a church function funeral to elevate that person's actions that were sinful to the level of reverement. And that's what they did. They revered his sin. They didn't celebrate his accomplishments of virtue. They celebrated his accomplishments of sin. That is the main point we want to make here. It is not, like we said, it is not wrong to have this funeral at this church. It is not wrong to have this guy buried at St. Patrick's Basilica. It is wrong to act like they did in that setting. That was the scandal.
Yeah, I mean, again, really just sort of just talk about, it's all obviously scandalous, obviously horrible, terrible things, and it's kind of, it's heartbreaking to see that happen in a Catholic church, and to have, I mean, thankfully, I haven't seen too many people defend it, but I've seen a couple of articles that were written from the very opposite direction, that they're like, how could the Catholic Church, which has held these beliefs for literally 2,000 years, suddenly say that this was a bad thing? I was like, well, it's a bad thing, you know? And I also find it interesting, and this could be a whole discussion in and of itself. I don't know that we want to get into it today, about just transgenderism in general, that this idea that people, like, that a man can say that he's a woman and then everyone has to believe them. That's literally an idea that wasn't held until like 5 seconds ago. So it's very interesting that that's the case, and that we're sort of turning this so much to the point that they are trying to hold open celebrations of this sinful practice, like in a Catholic mass, and then not expect any repercussions from it. So that's an interesting thing. Um, but I mean, I don't really know that there's much more to say about this specific subject that we haven't already talked about, because it was, like, I mean, it was so it's so openly wrong. We don't really need to provide too much insight onto why it's wrong. It's obviously just wrong. So
I think in the context of this funeral, it's really important to understand the parts of this that truly are sinful and why they're sinful, and why we need to understand the fundamental logic behind the theology of the body that allows you to understand why these things are sinful. As we know in the Catholic faith, for those that don't know, this is really important. Understand this fundamental logic. The body and the soul are combined into one entity. We are both body and soul. And what that means is that what we do with our bodies affects our soul, and what we do with our soul affects our bodies. What I mean by that is there are acts of physical desire that you can perform and acts of spiritual desire that you can perform. And either of those things can have effects on your body and soul. If we separate those two concepts and we think of ourselves as strictly a body or strictly a soul, that's when we get into camps of logical fallacies that allow these disparate religious concepts to form. In the solely a body camp, you have the atheists, where they believe that the body is the only thing that matters because the body is what is the result of evolution, and therefore whatever we do in our life means everything for the duration of the life, but once we're gone, nothing matters anymore. We're just a body. And therefore, these people are going to be afraid of death, they're going to be afraid of damage, and then they're going to be, they're going to be selfish. They're going to worry about themselves first and foremost because life is temporary. Their body is the only thing that matters. In the other camp, you have the soul is the only thing that matters. And these people are going to believe that their souls have some inherent identity that their bodies do not reflect. And this is where transgenderism comes from. Transgenderism believes that there is a soul that has a sexual identity or a gender identity that is disparate from your body's physical identity. And they claim that these almost always line up, but they don't always line up. And that's why transgenders exist, because when they don't line up, you have to change your body to be in line with your soul. The interesting thing about this is that it's an inherently it's a hypocritical statement to make, because if you believe that your body does not matter in comparison to your soul and you mutilate your body to change yourself to something that you believe you should be based on your soul, then what you're doing is you're admitting that your body does matter. And when you understand those two veins of logic, you understand where their pitfalls are. That's how you can understand why your body and soul are one and why they matter together, not separately. And from that vein of logic, we can follow into why we were created, what we should use our bodies for, what virtue is, and why God loves us, and what love is, and how we will the good of other people. Those are all things that come in line with the theology of the body. But maybe we should save that for another day. I know we talked about a lot of God is love last week, so I think the second thing that's really important to understand from the funeral is that a funeral is a sort of mass, and a mass is whenever you get to partake in sacraments, and obviously the center of mass is communion. In a funeral, the center, the highest sacrament that you want to focus on there is the rites of the dead and passing the dead on to the afterlife. And like we said before, prayers to the dead matter a lot. But I know, Will, there is some hot topic debate nowadays, very recently, with the converts to Catholicism talking about Novus Ordo Mass versus Latin Mass. You want to go ahead and take that one away?
I think this is very interesting. So I have experienced both Latin and the New Order. Um, I mean, I like Latin Mass a lot, and I like the New Order Mass a lot because they're both Mass. So let me explain. So from what I know about a lot of this is that we do have quite a large majority of people who go to Latin Mass are much younger, and people who go to the Novus Ordo Mass are usually older. Like if I look at my home parish, which offers the Novus Ordo Mass but not Latin Mass, and you go into any Mass, there are very few people who are younger towards my age bracket. But then you look up and it's a lot of people who probably have grandchildren, or at least their kids are like away all in college, something like that. And it's there's a lot more older people in this new one, where then I went to Latin mass and the entire thing was packed with nothing but young people, like 25, 26-year-old parents and their like 8 kids, which is awesome, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. Having 8 kids at that young is awesome, so good for them. And it's interesting, but so I haven't seen too much debate, but there are a few people that I know personally who I have gotten into an argument with. So there's this one guy that I know who would who didn't go to mass very often, but because he loved he loved traditional Latin mass, and he hates anything basically post Vatican II. So like the Novus Ordo mass, he would he very rarely ever showed up to one of those masses, and he would just say, but he would talk with everyone. He's like, yeah, they need to go to Latin mass. Latin mass is amazing. That's where you really get close to God. He was like, well, how about just go to mass? You know, mass is mass. Why why not go to mass? It's that's the whole point of the mass, is that you receive the Eucharist. How, and we talked about this really in our first episode, is that the point of the mass is sacrifice, right? You go into mass, you offer
Yeah.
something up, and in that offering you receive the greatest sacrifice, which was Jesus Christ in his body and his blood right there in the mass. And you get that during both traditional Latin mass and the Novus Ordo mass. And like, if you're getting the same thing,
I
in my opinion, like
I agree.
why are you arguing over which one is better? Okay, I like Latin mass more just because there's so much, like, it feels like there's like more lore to it, if that's the right word. But like, they're both mass. I really like them both. I in fact, I love them both. I'm excited to go to mass on the weekends, which is something a lot of people my age don't really say. But I've only been to Latin mass twice, and I haven't been in quite a few months. And I always go, but in the end, it's just mass. I'm receiving the same thing. I'm excited to receive the Eucharist. So if you're one of those people, I guess the takeaway for the story is if you're one of those people who refuses to go to the Novus Ordo mass because everything post Vatican II is like Satan spawn or something like that, okay, get out of your head. Go to mass. Okay, mass is mass. You can have a preference between the two, but mass is mass. Go to mass. Okay, please just do it. That's really all I
I
have to say on
agree.
that.
I agree with the idea that you should absolutely go to mass, regardless if it's a Latin mass or a Novus Ordo mass. And I would like to really pinpoint why the younger generation is looking towards Latin mass more often, and that's why I said this episode was going to be very Gen Z oriented. So Gen Zers out there, please stay tuned for the next however long this podcast goes on, because I think there's going to be a lot of things you need to hear. So there's an interesting point about a lot of the younger generation, younger millennials, older Gen Z going to Latin mass. Now, personally, I've never been to Latin mass. I really want to go. There is a parish only 20 minutes away from me that offers it, so I need to go. I have no excuse not to go at this point. I've just really been enjoying uh, being at my home parish with those that I love and can be in community with. But besides that, I know that the Latin Mass is much closer. Well, not much closer. It is the same Mass that has been performed for 2,000 years, and that's why people see it as a more traditional form of Mass. Because the point of the Novus Ordo Mass that came out of Vatican II was to modernize the Mass, was to make it English so that those in English-speaking countries could colloquialize the Mass. And it makes it more accessible to people. The problem with that is there's a lot of people that go to Mass to experience tradition, to experience the sacraments in the most traditional way possible. And Novus Ordo does take away from that tradition. It's because the Gospels are timeless. They don't necessarily exist in a certain age or a certain time, because God doesn't exist in a certain age or a certain time. So therefore, he's given us the sacraments and the rituals to perform regardless of the period of time we're in. And the modernization of the Mass really took away from that. So the Latin Mass brings you closer to the timelessness, and it makes you feel closer to God based on that. Now, again, never been to a Latin Mass, but I see that this is why the younger generation likes it. The younger generation I can say this is true of myself. A lot of us want to escape the modern day because the modern day has become so sacrilegious. It's become very atheist. It's become very secular, and it's begun to forget what truly matters in life. A lot of people in our age group, I would actually say this is mostly a millennial problem. A lot of millennials have an issue of both identity. Actually, no. Gen Z is identity problems. Millennials are purpose problems. So the millennials have a problem of purpose where they think that their careers or that their relationships are the most important thing in life. And that really removes the concept of God. There's even Catholics that view their lives this way, which is really unfortunate because once you put God as your priority in life, you start to realize how everything falls in place around that. So, and then on the Gen Z side, there's a lot of identity issues where a lot of Gen Zers are, becoming trans or identify as some variant of LGBT because they want to feel as though they have a label. And identity has become one of the most important things on the planet to Gen Zers. I can say that I have a lot of identities, and the identities that I think matter more, above all else, are the identities that show your role in society. My most important identity is Catholic. I would say that is my first and foremost identity. If I was to introduce myself to someone and they asked me what my highest priority was, I would say my faith in God, my love for God is my highest priority. And that's because when you focus everything around Catholic doctrine and you truly start to live in a way that a Catholic should, everything in your life becomes better. You respect people more. You treat people with love more often. You see things less selfishly. You give more charity. It's amazing what this faith does to you. And that's the identity that matters. This identity crisis in Gen Z is what's really caused an interesting outcrop of conservatism, especially amongst the men. I'm sure you've noticed this, Will. I mean, you were at Seek. Obviously, we both noticed this firsthand. But a lot of there was this graph that was going around for a while. I can't remember the exact source, but it was something like 65 to 70% of men in Gen Z self-identify as conservative now, and it's the exact opposite of for women. Like 70% of women identify as liberal, which is interesting. It makes sense because obviously women tend to trend liberal, especially when they're single. But it's more interesting to me that so many men are radicalizing in that way because you can look at any other age group and you don't see any statistics like this. But anecdotally, I can see that it's mostly a reaction to the concept of purpose, and we're looking at the people older than us that have this dreadful sense of purposelessness, and the men in our generation are looking for purpose where a lot of people have forgotten. And that is within family, within religion, within faith, within love for others. And that's just something that liberalism doesn't provide. I'm sure you've had some anecdotes in that regard. Do you have any in mind?
No, I don't think I've really experienced any anecdotes about this, but I do like offer sort of my own little my own input as to why I think that this is happening. And you were talking about like an identity crisis, right? That it seems like no
Yeah.
one seems to know who they are anymore, and so they're making up their own identities. Um, and like you said, there's multiple types of identities. I personally don't have a political identity. I have political opinions and beliefs, of course, but I am first and foremost a Catholic man. When it comes to at least my political identity, so I probably vote with things that are more aligned to my Catholic faith, which in this case, where it's an American case, it tends to be more conservative. Um,
Yeah.
Now, on top of that, though, or really underneath it, because this is where I think the core is that my identity is as a child of God. I have called you and you are mine. That's my identity right now, is that Christ has called me and I am his. And I try to live my life through Christ, and I try to live my life like Christ. I fail miserably every day, but I try. And that's my point. And I think what I'm about to say sort of gets back to what we were talking about last week, like what happens when you lose God. Well, this society, like this culture, I sound like the Joker, society, but like the culture has, like, we just don't have God in our culture anymore. God is no longer popular culture, and he's sort of taboo nowadays. And when people don't have God to base their identity in, they don't base their identity in God. They have to worship something, because humans inherently worship something. Whether you claim you don't worship God or something, you worship something. You always do. It's whatever you put at the center of your life. That is what you're worshiping. And a lot of these people end up putting themselves at the center, and they worship themselves. And now all of a sudden their identity is in themselves, which in itself is sort of like a paradox, because your identity is you. You cannot be like, your identity is based in your identity, which makes no sense. It's just a circular thing. So all of a sudden they define their own identities, and that's what they're trying to live off of, because everyone wants an identity. But
Absolutely.
Nowadays, no one is basing it off of the right identity, which is as a child of God. One who is loved, one who has been redeemed, and one who is trying to work their way to get back to him. And no one wants that anymore. Or it's not that they don't want that. Everyone wants that. In your heart, you want God. It is just an innate thing as a human being who's created by God, where God is meant to be your guiding light. He's meant to be your core. When you don't have him, you still want him, but you don't know where to look if you don't know him. And people start to look into themselves.
Yeah, you look in on yourself, and you look in on idols. And a lot of people start to idolize themselves, which is where the narcissism of today's age has come from. Something very interesting. There's a couple outcrops that have happened recently. There was that one girl on TikTok that was talking about, it was sort of like a comedic reflection of her dad abandoning her family in order to go become a break dancer, right? You remember this story?
Yes. Oh, this one's going to be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, this story, there's a lot of really interesting reactions to it.
Yeah, before we get into it, I kind of want to I think we should show them the actual clips first. So we're going to show you first, back to back. We're going to show you first the first girl. I don't remember her name. Her TikTok, where she talks about basically what her dad did, and then we're going to show the response, or at least some of the response by her dad, because her dad's response was a full 10 minutes, and I don't really want to watch. I don't want to make everyone who's listening go through all 10 minutes of it. So we're gonna put basically the big part that he put in there, and we're just gonna sort of respond to that.
Trauma that you have, that's funny. It has to actually be funny. I'll go first. My dad abandoned my family when I was 5 years old. That is a wife and 4 kids. He abandoned us and then pursued amateur breakdancing, and he got really good. He like blew up. Like he became like a D-list celebrity status, like viral breakdancer. He became like the oldest actively competing breakdancer in the world. Then he got on Good Morning America and talk shows, and Washington Post wrote about him, and he went super viral, and he did all these interviews, and he danced with Paula Abdul. The worst part, damn it, he's good. He should not be able to move his body like that. It's like impossible. It's beautiful. Hey, Dad.
Thank you, Maddie.
Like there was no split custody or anything. Like he just like left 4 kids to do that. He may not have paid for some of my medical bills growing up, but he did give me this breakdancing merchandise. So that's him. He's on his
That is a nice shirt.
It's his b-boy name because his name is Ben Hart. You know, I'll get texts like this, "Happy birthday?" ? And then like links to his breakdancing video.
That's true.
You have funny trauma, like actual funny haha trauma.
See that as a 5-year-old, Maddie would see her dad as having abandoned the family. One day I was living there, the next day I wasn't. And that will look like abandonment to a child. But married couples do get divorced about half the time in America. And I was just living a mile or so down the street in LaGrange, Illinois. We just weren't living under the same roof. Now, about not paying medical bills, that's just not correct. Here was the financial arrangement of the divorce. Maddie's mom, my ex-wife, got $2 million at the get-go, out of the gate, a lump sum payment. Plus, I was paying her $18,000 per month in child support and alimony. This was later reduced to $12,000 per month. And of course, I paid health insurance and out-of-pocket medical costs. I also put $600,000 into the kids' college fund. In all, I paid out about $5 million to my ex-wife to cover costs for her and the kids. And this is in 2005 dollars. So add 50% to account for inflation. In other words, I was not a deadbeat dad at all.
First off, the couple things that stand out about this specific situation here is that this girl is talking about how her dad she was talking about like, what's your funny trauma story, and she's talking about her dad who left home to become a professional breakdancer and like divorced his wife and abandoned the entire family, and then he goes out and actually gets popular at it, and she like sort of laughs off the entire situation. It's really a terrible situation. Anytime a father abandons their family, it's a terrible situation, because now you're not being a man, you're being a coward. Real men take care of their families. It's actually a big theme from The Godfather, is like, you got to be a real man to spend time with your wife and kids. It's an important thing. It's why I love The Godfather. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But it's this thing. What I want to talk about mostly was the dad's response. So, you've seen this, right? You've seen this video about the dad's response.
Yeah. Yep.
It's so you go ahead and put your thoughts into it first, because I've got a few, but I want to give you the spotlight here. Hear what you have to say about it.
Sure. So I would say the first thing to recognize here is the interesting reactions. So if we go ahead and split up the dichotomy, we've got, like 4 or so camps in Gen Z, where we've got the feminist camp that's going to be, trashing on this dad because he abandoned his kids. And then you're going to have the more liberal, almost moderate camp where, they're going to be sort of sympathetic to both sides. They're going to be like, oh, well, the dad paid some money back, so maybe he wasn't so bad, but, I still feel bad for the family. And then you're going to have the anti-feminist neocon perspective, where they're going to be on the dad's side because, oh, he's his own man. He paid money to the family. What are they complaining about? And then you're going to have the correct view here, which is this dad is one of the shittiest representations of what it means to be a man. And the reason I say that is because he believes that money can replace fatherhood, and it can't. I feel horrible for this family losing their dad just because he simply chose to. He clearly didn't do it just to become a breakdancer, by the way. He did it to go to a new woman, and so that he wouldn't have to take care of these kids. And these kids grew up fatherless, and this is exactly what has created our problem in Gen Z. When people don't grow up with fathers, they are more likely to have mental problems, to commit crimes, and to lose their identity. And these girls clearly have. I mean, I can tell you right now, this girl very much is not anywhere near the conservative side. And it's because she didn't have a dad in the picture. This dad believes that the $2 million he paid in alimony makes up for the decades that his children will not get with him. And that is absolutely insane. When you are a real man, you take care of your children. And I don't care if this is going to be a position that the neocons are upset about, but a traditional conservative should look at this and be horrified, because a dad should never leave his children like that.
Not just like
I don't care how bad it gets.
Not just a traditional conservative.
I don't
really,
care.
everyone should.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This should be the mainstream view. Absolutely. And this is another thing that's interesting. This horseshoe theory. It's that I end up agreeing with the people that are blindly on this woman's side because of her identity. But I agree with her not because of her identity, but because of how a man should act. And this is something that has really been forgotten. I would say that the neocon men nowadays, they want to reject the idea of relationships and reject the idea of marriage because it's complicated and because women have lost their way and lost their identities and what it means to be a wife and a mother. But that is running away from the problem because you're too scared to face it. You can't disregard the institution of marriage or disregard respecting women just because you feel that it's too difficult to do so. In order to act like a real man, you have to step up, take those sacrifices, make the difficult decisions, take care of your children regardless of the trauma that it causes you, because you've already made that decision to have them. You can't abandon them over that. I know I keep bragging on this same thing, but in previous episodes, but this really speaks to how we've lost the definition of marriage. This guy was married and he divorced his wife to run off for a new woman. But you can't do that. You don't get to leave a marriage just because you don't like it anymore. You know, the institution of marriage is not just an institution. It is a sacrament. And what that means is that it is an eternally binding, I wouldn't say contract, eternally binding covenant between a man and a woman that makes you one flesh. We can read Genesis and get the exact info on this. A man and a woman in marriage combine into one flesh. That doesn't mean that they are really close or they listen to each other. No, that means that you two now share a life. And if you have children, you share those children. You take care of those children together. This guy, I don't care if I'm agreeing with the feminists here. This guy is a sorry excuse for a man, and I feel deeply sorry for these children having to experience that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Basically, you hit every point that I was thinking of too. So I don't know that I can much. You're right that this guy, he tries to defend his actions by saying, "Well, I can see how a child would see that as abandonment." Like, but I wasn't really abandoning them. Yes, you were. Okay, if you divorce your wife and you leave your kids for another woman or for something stupid like breakdancing, you're abandoning your family. Because, like you said earlier, Colin, marriage between a man and a woman, which, by the way, marriage is only between a man and a woman, not like a man and a woman or a dude and a billy goat, whatever it is. It's a marriage is between a man and a woman, and that is not a contract. It is a covenant. It's a sacrament that you guys are now together until death do you part. That's the whole point. You cannot split apart just because you're not compatible. And that's a really interesting thing here, is that he talks about how he and his wife were no longer compatible with each other. It's like, okay, so what? Okay, you marry this woman, you have kids with her, and so you're just going to blow up your children's lives just to go do your own thing. This is honestly one of the most selfish arguments. This is one of the most selfish arguments I've ever heard in my life, is that, I wasn't compatible with this other person because they happen to be another person and not exactly like me, therefore I can get out of it. That's not it. It's an evil way to think about somebody else that you have made a covenant with and a sacrifice with, or a sacrifice for, to just pull out of that out of nowhere, or just to pull out of it in general, because you can't. You are married. You have this covenant. You have this sacrament with another person. You guys are meant to stay together until death do you part. That is the rule of marriage, is that you're supposed to stay together. You cannot get apart from each other. So obviously, I mean, like everything you said, that this guy, just absolute shitty excuse for a dad. Terrible man. And don't do that. If you're a guy who's listening, if you're a guy who's listening to this podcast and you're considering leaving your family for breakdancing, smack yourself in the face and then go talk to a priest, because that is such a horrible idea, because it's going to ruin, and not to get into like the effect. Obviously, divorce has terrible effects on children. I know multiple people, including family members, whose parents are divorced, and these kids, like, you could tell it just has an effect on them. And that's a terrible thing. So, rule of thumb with this especially, don't get divorced. This guy, I mean, seeing this, it really, really pissed me off to see this, because it's such a clear-cut example of how a dad is not supposed to act. He abandons his family, runs off with another woman, and then lies about his circumstances, by the way, in retrospect, to make him seem more like a good guy. Like, he's like, "Oh, I'm owning my daughter because she's sounding spoiled." It's like, well, she has some, like, I understand her complaining. Are you kidding me? You abandoned your own kids, your own flesh and blood, just to go, what? Screw around with some other woman? Like, What is wrong with you? And so, obviously, like you said before, shitty excuse for a father. Don't do that. If you're considering it on your own end, don't do that. Bad idea. So, I mean, there's not really much more I can add to that. And like I said, this pisses me off too. But not really. Speaking of getting pissed off, this is not going to tick you off. This doesn't tick me off as much as it does tick me off. It doesn't tick me off as much as this next thing is. Where going up to the good old state of Illinois. you know where I'm going with this one, right? All right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So before we transition right into that, let me give a little bit of a smoother transition to that.
Yeah. Okay.
So we talked about Gen Z, the phenomenon we're experiencing with our identity crisis. We're talking about how a lot of Gen Zers have suffered this abandonment because we've lost the idea of marriage, and therefore people are leaving their marriages, and it's causing trauma. Well, there's one more thing that you can do to cause unparalleled amounts of trauma, and that's take children away from parents because they disagree with your ideology. And that's exactly what this Illinois bill does. So we'll go ahead and explain that Illinois bill.
According to the Daily Wire, this is here's the name of the headline. Quote, Illinois bill changes definition of abused child to include kids whose parents oppose abortion, transgender hormones, and surgeries. This is the article itself. Quote, a recently introduced bill in the state of Illinois would change the definition of an abused child to include minors whose parents object to their children receiving puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, transgender surgeries, and abortions. House Bill 4876, which was introduced in February, also shields doctors from liability if they prescribe such treatments to minors who do not have parental consent. Just read this part again. Shields doctors from liability if they prescribe such treatments to minors who do not have parental consent, and empowers the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, or DCFS, to step in, and if they deem it necessary, remove the children from their parents based on the new definition of an abused child. So I'm not going to read the rest of this article, but I am going to read the summary of the bill, and this is the bill itself. The official summary of the bill, House Bill 4876. Here it is, okay? Summary. Amends the Abused and Neglected Child Reporting Act, provides that, quote, abused child, unquote, means a child whose parent or immediate family member or any person responsible for the child's welfare or any individual residing in the same home as the child or a paramour of the child's parent denies the child access to necessary medical care, including, but not limited to, primary care services, abortion services, or gender-affirming services. Amends the Consent by Minors to Health Care Services Act, specifies that consent to the performance of abortion services and gender-affirming services executed by a minor is not voidable because of such minority. Provides that a healthcare professional rendering abortion services and gender-affirming services shall neither incur nor civil nor criminal liability for future or obtain valid consent of professional discipline, nor for failure to obtain valid consent if the healthcare professional relied in good faith on representations made by the minor. So, just to put that into my own words, Illinois, by a representative, by the way, I have her name up actually. So, according to Representative Ann Stava Murray, Ann Stava Murray, Representative of Illinois, says basically what it is that this new bill says that if you are a parent, like for instance a Catholic Christian parent, or a Jewish parent, or even a Muslim parent, because a lot of people seem to forget this, is that Islam also opposes abortion. Abortion is not a good thing in the Islam religion. Basically, it says that if you do not want your child, if they get pregnant by some circumstance, if you do not want your child to have an abortion, maybe we'll take that kid away from you. Or if your kid identifies as some sort of LGBT identification and the parents don't go along with it because it's false, we can take the child away from you. That's essentially what it says. Now, when I first texted this to Colin, and when I first read this and I texted it to him, he replied with a text that was like pretty. He said, "I will personally purge Illinois and then a couple of words that I cannot say on air. Um, so you know, I know Colin is fairly heated about this topic, so I'd like to give him the spotlight and start with this topic as well because I really do want to hear what you have to say about this.
All right. Simply put, this is a war on parental rights. That's what it is. For a long time now, and this is why we don't try to cover politics on this podcast too much because that's not the point of this podcast. The point of this podcast is to discuss current events and discuss theology and become a better Catholic. That's what the point of this podcast is. And then for those that aren't Catholic, allowing you to understand our faith better and perhaps come to our faith. That would be fantastic. Please come to our faith. If you want to reach out to me, I will help you do that. But anyways, back to the topic. This is why we don't talk about politics too much. But this specific bill affects every religious parent. And it affects us in such a fundamental way because I get that it's only Illinois, but this shows a worrying trend of undermining parental rights. People that don't have children want to control what you do to raise your children. And that is simply unacceptable. You as a parent should have every single right on how you raise your child because you know what's best for your child. You do. Not the government, not your not their teachers, not your friends, not even your cousins, not your brothers, sisters, or your parents. You are responsible for your child. You know what's best for your child. You bore that child. Not the government. You bore that child. And when the government comes in and says that if you use your parental rights to deny parental consent for something that would alter your child's life in such a fundamental way that they would receive significant trauma from it, because let's not beat around the bush here. If you get an abortion, you probably will suffer some mental trauma. It is horrible for a woman to kill her own child. And a woman will suffer from that. I don't care if that woman is 14. I don't care if that woman is 40. You will suffer trauma from that abortion. And secondly, you will suffer trauma if the government promotes you to change your sex. Because you can't. And if you try to, you will mutilate your body. You will take hormones that alter your body. You will make a bastardization of you simply because you are being lied to. And this is why it's so important to exemplify, or not exemplify, shout out that those who are transgender are not responsible for the entire ideology. They are victims of this ideology. Those that are responsible for these things are the ones that administer the quote gender-affirming care. And that's doctors. That's these politicians pushing these bills. These are the people responsible for these kinds of things. And if we want these things to stop, if we want abortions to stop, if we want gender-affirming care, which I'm going to call it what it is, genital mutilation, if you want that to stop, you have to you have to put those doctors in prison. It's that simple. You are not allowed to mutilate my child. It's as simple as that. This Illinois bill allows it. This Illinois bill doesn't only allow it, it gives those doctors immunity for their evil actions. This bill is the incarnation of evil, and it's simple as that. Those of you in Illinois, please go vote against this bill.
Yeah, that's yeah, no, that's yeah, that's really well said. I genuinely don't think I can say what you said any better. So I'm going to try and offer my own perspective, which, by the way, I'm not going to defend this. So please don't take it that way. Obviously, everything you said there is true and it's wrong. But I want to come at it from a little bit of a different perspective where you say this is a war on parental rights. And you're absolutely right. By extension, this is a war on children themselves. Because, like, when you take away... So, first of all, the obvious one. Abortion. Abortion is child abuse. Okay? You are literally warring on unborn children when you advocate for abortion. That's what abortion is. It's literally the murder and slaughter of unborn children. On top of that, when you take away parental rights, or really you take away the parents, that child is going to be messed up because now they don't have parents. Because what's the point of a parent? A parent has kids, and the parent's job with those children is to lead them to God, to live a flourishing and a good life to that eventually points back to Jesus Christ. That's the point of a parent, or at least a Catholic parent. It should be the point of all parents. And with this, you run into people who want to take away these parents and supplant them with their own evil ideology. Like you want to replace it with other people who will implant an evil ideology into these people, like transgenderism. That ruins kids. We can look into the statistics of kids who suffer from transgender ideology. I don't know the exact numbers themselves, so I'm not going to say it, and like, because I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know that the kids who are affected by this transgender ideology are demonstrably worse off than kids who are not. And I hate to say it, but like, a lot of this comes from just the bad parenting. And if you want to take away this stuff and you want to take away these kids from their parents, you are committing essentially what I mean, this is strong language, but what I see is like an act of war on these kids. It is a war against children to say that these parents don't have the right to protect their own kids, because kids cannot protect themselves. They can't, because they're children. They're not adults. They don't have the moral aptitude. They don't have the cognitive function. They are just simply not ready to defend themselves. And they have their parents to do that. The parents are there to protect their kids and to point them towards Jesus Christ, that they live a flourishing, happy life that is centered around Christ. And you take that away, you take away those parents, you all of a sudden, you're taking away that kid's protection. You're taking away their guidance, and that kid is now left with nothing. Or worse, he's left with, or maybe not worse, but just as bad, he's left with or given someone who will point them in the opposite direction. And it's genuinely just, this is one of, if not the most evil bill I have ever seen in American politics in general, because of how morally bankrupt and corrupt it is. Because I don't know how much I can stress this. Taking away kids from their literal protectors is just the most evil thing I've ever heard. And it's extremely frustrating that this is something frustrating is such a light word to use for this. It is so infuriating that this is what people are spending their time doing. And if you do,
it's incredible that people believe they have rights over someone else's children. And I think one of the most important things to recognize here is that this isn't just trying to take children from their parents. This is trying to make children adults, is what it is. Because if you take away the power of parental consent, what you're doing is you're allowing children to make adult decisions for themselves outside of that parental consent. You are essentially attempting to lower the age of consent. And we see this happening in a lot of different areas. We're seeing doctors reach out to children and try to trans them much, much earlier in their life, so like 11, 12 years old. Sometimes parents facilitate this, but there are school counselors, teachers doing these kinds of things to children. And these children are victims of this every day in America. There's so many detransitioners that are coming out and talking about their stories when they were young and about how their parents were scared, so they listened to the doctors. But I want to emphasize so much here that you as the parent, again, you know what's best for your child. If that doctor uses some fallacy on you to try to convince you that your child should, receive transgender care, it's not care. Transgender mutilation, discard that doctor, go to a different primary care doctor. That person is a scumbag of a human being. There are a lot of narcissistic doctors that believe that they can play God with other people's bodies. They can't. But I don't want to end this podcast on a such drab note, because I feel like we've ragged on a lot of very depressing topics today. So I want to bring this.
Today was a very down. It was a very negative energy day, as some people like to say.
which is interesting because I actually had a really good week. So
I did
I want to
too.
bring this back to a positive note on all these things. That despite the circumstances that we're going through as Catholics and as those who want to serve God in every capacity that we can, obviously we're going to come across obstacles. There's going to be people that try to stop
Hmm.
us. But something that's very heartwarming to see is the reaction to this kind of thing and how many people are coming to the faith. So, uh, as you guys may know, if you've listened to the previous podcast episodes, I am currently in the RCIA program because I'm getting baptized on March 30th. So, I've been around a lot of people coming into the faith, young and old. You'd actually be surprised how young some of these people are and how old some of these people are. I have some people that are in their 60s that are coming into the faith right now, and there was actually an amazing woman. I didn't get to meet her, unfortunately, but she was a member of my parish as well as a friend of my fiance's family. Her name was Joan. God rest her soul. She came into the faith at a very late age. I think she was in her early 70s whenever she came into the faith for the first time, and she was only in the faith for 1 to 2 years. Hmm? 80s. I've just been told by my fiance that she was in her 80s, so she was even older than that. And she became a Catholic a year before she passed away. She was officially accepted into the church. So it is amazing to see all these people that are coming into the Catholic Church and praising God and becoming devout Catholics. And that's another thing that I really appreciated about the rite of election that just recently happened this past weekend. The rite of election is a ceremony where the archbishop of whatever archdiocese you're a part of goes ahead and officially accepts you as members of the elect, which means that you will be baptized in the coming season, Easter season. So when I was there, and this is for the Archdiocese of St. Louis alone, this isn't for any other archdiocese. So our archdiocese serves about 2.5 million people. It's not super big. There were 900 people that are going to be baptized this coming Easter. 900 people. And that was just at my rite of election. And there were 2 that weekend. So double that. That's how many people are coming into the faith this year just in St. Louis. That's a lot of people. And now that's happening all over the nation. So that's a very positive thing to look at. And another very positive thing to look at is, again, how Gen Z is becoming conservative and how Gen Z is recognizing the faults of the generations past, the definition of marriage being broken, the idea that children can be adults, that idea is being broken down. And we're seeing a return to traditionalism. We're seeing a return to conservatism. And I think that is one of the most optimistic, hope-inspiring things that I have seen recently. So those of you in Gen Z, God bless you. Thank you for recognizing the way of the light. And I hope that you guys have the conviction to spread that positivity to those around you. Because I would just like to say again, we talked about this, that He Gets Us commercial last week. Love the person, hate the sin. You do not have to love sin. You do not have to love the sin just because it's attached to a person you love. If you truly love somebody, bring them away from that sin. Bring them away from the thing that is hurting their soul. Bring them to the light.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And
Um,
that's all I've got to say for today.
yeah, I'll lead us in closing prayer this week. But just I want to before we do, I want to say, well, no, I led it last week. So before you lead us in closing prayer this week, I do want to say a really important. I want to add sort of something what you said is that while we do want to end on a high note, I do want to add a little bit of a cautious thing as well. Is that with today, especially with the very first topic we talked about that 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 funeral in New York. It's there's so much more instances of this. Maybe not that specifically, but there's many more instances of what I'm about to say. Make no mistake, the church itself is under attack. It has been for a very long time. And you see this in not just this, but also by far Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. There there are forces. I'm not going to say that the devil himself is literally in the world killing Christians and uploading all this, but the spirit that is behind all of these actions is not the Holy Spirit, obviously. And the spirits that's behind these actions and most of this culture. Um every single act that these people that we talk about that we did that they do that is evil and bad is just it's not a good Holy Spirit. It is obviously an evil spirit that is just behind all this. Everything here is done with evil intentions, and whether these people intended or not, it it is an attack on the church because there is a physical reality, there is a spiritual reality, and I guarantee you that the spiritual reality is influencing all of this just to attack the church itself. And so we as Catholics, and really as Christians in general, but we as Catholics are called to defend Christ's church. We're called to defend Christ because this defense of Christ that we were called to do is vital to our spiritual life. And it's important that we defend him with our lives if needed. So that's what I want to end with is just go out and defend the church, defend Christ, fight for Christ because there's not there's a lot of people who are fighting a war. There's a lot being fought against the church, and they need warriors for the church. So with that being said, Colin, go ahead and lead us in closing prayer. Thank you guys very much for showing up this week.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. God, I am so glad that you brought us such great weeks this past week. However, I would like to ask you and petition you to help these people that have suffered this degradation in their lives, to just bring them towards you in whatever way you can. Show them the light and show them the gospel so that they may be closer to you and get away from this ever-encroaching amount of sin that's ragging on us every day. All of those in the younger generation suffering these ill effects of transgenderism, the LGBT, and identity crises, and the breakdown of the institution of marriage, all of these things are draining on our souls, and they need to be healed. And the only way they can be healed is through you. So thank you, God, for the powers of your reconciliation and the amazing light that your word brings to our lives. And I hope that every single one of us has a wonderful week. And pray for us, the leaders of this podcast, because we need it just as much as you guys do, because we lose our way sometimes, and we need just as much guidance as everyone else out there does. So, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next week. Same time as always, Monday, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.